Here we are.
All right. I think we are streaming. So
Awesome.
now we will wait for a few folks to join. I'm looking over here. Let me.
Yeah, I
Uh,
feel like you got to be almost like an orchestrator, like or a conductor, right? Like because there's so many screens you got to look at just to see if we're up and running.
yeah, exactly. It's like a command center.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, cool. We should be recording. We should be all good. And okay, the thing about let's see. Hey everyone, for anyone who's joined, we'll be getting started in just a minute. Thanks for joining.
Good morning and happy Monday to everybody.
Well, October is almost over. Like, we got Halloween right around the corner.
Yep. Yep. What are the kids for Halloween?
So my bigger one wants to be a clown,
Yeah.
and I think
Scary
the little
clown?
one is still undecided.
Uh,
Just like a regular clown,
just
nothing too
regular.
crazy.
How old?
10 and 5.
Okay, got it. Yeah, clown is like at that age it's about getting to as fast as many houses as you can, and you want to be like as simple as costume as possible.
She had a good one last year. Last year she did a weird Barbie, and it was
Okay.
pretty amazing. It was very
Oh,
timely. It was good.
cool. All right.
Um, alrighty, are we? Let me see. Okay, I'm trying to get to a place to,
See how many people are watching.
yeah, get to the event itself on LinkedIn. I'm not an expert at this, but I think we are streaming. All right.
All right.
Well, with that, I'm gonna make sure my destinations are working. Everything seems to be streaming. All right, we will kick things off. Everyone, thanks for joining. We're with Bob Moesta.
Yeah.
I think I overpronounced the E.
Yeah, it's just say that it's say it like it's Mesta. Mesta.
Mesta.
Bob
Bob
Mesta.
Mesta, who I've had the pleasure of learning from directly and working
Yeah,
with. And
yeah, yeah.
when we were first talking about products and jobs to be done, I realized he had a passion for helping people land jobs. So there's a lot
Yeah,
of jobs language. And we got to talking, and I realized he was writing this book. And I've been waiting eagerly for this book for
yeah,
18 months because I had heard hints of it. And super excited to share it. Bob's theories on development of products and thinking about
yeah,
yourself as a product, and just an incredible book with great
yeah.
insights. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Bob.
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate it. So I've been helping people with their career. I think for over 30 years, like just being a sounding board and helping friends and doing different things. But it's one of those things where back in 2009, I met Ethan Bernstein. He was Clay Christian was his PhD advisor, and he's in the organizational behavior department at Harvard Business School. And he had talked about the fact that I'd always used jobs to be done as kind of a framework around helping understand how to build what's next in product, right? But Ethan came to me and said, I'm wondering if we can use this to help people understand their careers. So it's like 2009. So it's been almost 15 years. And we've been basically collecting data for all that time, thousands of people, about what causes people to say, today's the day I'm going to leave this company and go to that company. And so I want to share a little bit of the research with you, share kind of like how I think it helps you in terms of going and finding a job. And then ultimately kind of share a little bit about the process and kind of what's going on, and then just open it for questions. Okay. So let me start by, I'm going to present a little bit here. Let's get here, window. We're going to go to this, and we're going to go share, and I'm going to go to this. And so this body of work really started around this notion of asking founders and CEOs kind of what are the top three problems that they wrestle with kind of every year after year. And one of the things was it always came back to kind of talent and acquiring talent and keeping talent and understanding talent. And so basically I started with Ethan, and then Michael Horn got involved as well, because we wrote a book called Choosing College. And ultimately we started interviewing people around this, right? A little bit of my background is basically I'm from Detroit, Michigan. I'm an entrepreneur. I've done 7 startups. I'm also known for being a co-architect of the jobs to be done theory with Clayton Christensen. and basically have been using it on over 3,500 different products and services, right? And the basic premise of Jobs to Be Done is that people don't buy products, they hire them to do a job in their life and make progress. And ultimately, the fact is that it turns out that if somebody's wanting to do something new, it has to start with a struggling moment. I always say that the seed of all innovation comes from a struggling moment. And that struggling moment has to have some components to it, which is not only do you have to have a notion of kind of being in this notion of being stuck and that there's a better way, but you also have to have an idea of what it's like to be on the other side. Because if you don't have the idea of what's like to be on the other side, you end up just kind of bitching and complaining about things, but not doing anything about it. But the moment that you actually see what's possible, then you start to realize, like, okay, if I'm in this situation and I want to get over there, and that's a let's say a river you want to cross, there's thousands of ways to get across that river. I can swim it, I can build a bridge, I can dig a tunnel, I can get a plane, I can get a helicopter, I can get a boat, I can do a ferry, etc. Like, there's just 1,000 ways to get across. But it isn't until we understand the circumstance and the progress that makes us understand kind of what we're supposed to go build. And so the premise here is to take and think of yourself as a product and saying, like, what progress are you trying to make? And ultimately, what progress are people trying to make when they leave their job? And so out of this, right, I've done this, I've applied this concept to 3,500 different products, everything from the Patriot missile guidance system to Intercom and MailChimp and Huddle and QuickBooks and places like that. But Michael and Ethan really kind of talked about this as applying it to their career. So we just started one as we've been helping people for a while, but we started to actually just pool our efforts in trying to say how would we go about doing this. And then ultimately, Ethan and I started a class, I think in 2012, 2013, where I was helping them kind of around basically helping people navigate their career at HBS. And so out of that class, then we kind of did more and more research. We built some algorithms, and we basically have some different a process to follow, right? And so the basic premise is this: is that employees just don't work for companies; they hire them to make progress in their life. And so again, if we think of the job, the position you're going to do, is that most people actually end up hiring companies more than companies hire them. And so you start to realize that, and most people are at-will employees. And so what is it about that struggling moment that says today's the day that you want to actually move on and do something different? And ultimately, what are you actually reaching for on that other side? And so that's really where we start, is we start by looking at kind of some past changes you might have made, but then looking at kind of what are those things that actually drove you and what are the energy drivers and drains, right? And so the craziest part is when you talk to people about how did you get your current job, the number one phrase that comes up all the time is, I just got so lucky. It's like they're playing dice, and it's like, I just happen to be at this point and see this person and do this. But when you actually unpack it all and hear people's stories, it's more like dominoes. Like, there's things that had to happen to them in order to make them ready to see the next job, as opposed to thinking it's like dice and just like, how many resumes can I get out? How many different people can I find? Let me see if I can get luck on my side. And so ultimately, we use this approach in terms of kind of thinking about it in terms of what are the dominoes that have to fall in people's lives. And so we think about this as ultimately, if you're trying to switch from one job over here, let's say the job you have, to a new job, there has to be some forces at play. And we call these pushes and pulls, meaning there's pushes of the situation that actually cause you to say, like, this is going on, and like at some point I've got to be able to do something different. And what we would say is questions create spaces in the brain for solutions to fall into. And so it's as simple as somebody asking you, how is work? And if work wasn't good, it's fester inside you, and it's going to create a bunch of pushes to say, like, God, this isn't right, or I can do better at this, or this isn't, I want to do something more or something different. And so part of it is being able to understand the push. The second part is being able to understand, as you look for something new, what are you going to be doing, and what are the outcomes that you're really seeking by going to a new job? Is it really more money, or is it more responsibility, or is it more working in a closer team? Like, you start to realize, like, you have to actually understand what you want, right? But each one of those comes with, as you look at a new job, there's actually anxieties. Like, who are the people? What are the real hours I'm going to work? How much vacation do I really get? Will I actually learn what I want to learn? And then there's habits of the present, which is the stuff that you have to give up in order to switch jobs, like the people that you work with now that you might love. And so part of it is being able to understand the combination of pushes and pulls and anxieties and habits that actually have to come together for you to actually decide to actually switch jobs, because it's not easy to switch from one job to the next, right? And so ultimately the fact is you also go through a process of doing this, right? There's a first thought. And again, I say questions create spaces in the brain for solutions to fall into. And the moment that there's a first thought that there can be something better, or there should be something better, or there is something better, you start to look. And you start to actually go through passive looking, and then there's some event that has you start to fill out your resume and really start to look for it. And then all of a sudden you get offers, and you can decide back and forth. And usually they don't come in ones. Job offers usually comes in twos or threes, where you end up kind of getting a couple offers. And so you got to make some trade-offs along the way. And ultimately you have to make the decision and consume and see if you can be satisfied. And so ultimately we started by just interviewing all these people who basically were at one job and said, what had to happen for you to actually get to that other job, right? And so as we went through this process, right, we conducted it, we did interviews. And to be honest, we started with our foundational 10 interviews, but we've been adding interviews and more interviews. So we have, I think, over 1,000 interviews that we've done over this thing, and found patterns that go against it, right? And so we did a wide variety of individuals, people who were, basically everything from people who worked like in restaurants, to basically people who were lawyers, to people who became doctors, to people who were, startup people who basically went from product to customer success, for example. And it's just ultimately what caused people to say, today's the day I'm going to leave, and what patterns can we see across it, right? And so ultimately, as we start to see these patterns, so we can start to look at this thing in a very different way. And so what I want you to do is think back to like your last job change, and you were leaving a company and going to a company. So think about the company you were leaving, and what I want you to do is think about and look at these statements and figure out how many of these statements had to be true for you to start looking for something else. Ready? So here are the statements. We call these pushes, and these are the things that basically cause you to say, today's the day. Like at some point, there's got to be something better. It could be about respect and trust. It could be about the fact that you're bored. It could be the fact that you're not challenged enough. It could be the fact that they're actually challenging you way too much. And so part of it is a blend of these things. And what we found is that at some point it's a combination of four of these. Any four of these. Like if I ask my kids, how was your day? And they mention any four of these kind of things, I can almost guarantee they're looking for something new. And so part of it is to realize it's not any one of them, but it's a set of them that go together, right? And just like the fact is there's pushes, pushes, there's also pulls. And so as they start to look at, so it could be that there's a big push to basically leave their job, but if they don't actually have something on the other side to actually go to, they can't find it. And so now I want you to think about the things that actually were on the other side. Basically, when you looked at this new job, what were you running towards, if you will, when you did this? And so here are the things that people are looking for as they basically go towards looking for a new job. And so ultimately, what's so interesting is you start to realize that we had to actually unpack a lot of this language. And what that means is people would say, oh, I wanted more money. And we would say, well, why do you want more money? And it's like, well, you know what? I deserve more money because at some point, I'm underpaid for where I am. And the fact is, it's about respect. Versus other people say, oh, I need more money because, to be honest, I've now got 3 kids instead of 2, and I've got to earn more because I got more mouths to feed. And so you start to realize that at some point the outcomes, like most people would say that it's about money, but actually it's about outcomes that they want to be able to get to. And so it's about framing these outcomes and being able to understand it, and also frame the trade-offs you're willing to make, right? And so ultimately it's these aspects of these dominoes, these pushes and pulls that have to go in and basically help you find that out. But the other interesting part is then when we start to look at the patterns of that we actually only found basically 4 different patterns, 4 different reasons why people switch jobs. And the reason why this becomes important is because it sets the context by which how you need to respond. Because at some point, if you're in one job, you actually might do one thing in one area, but if you go to a different cluster, you basically are going to have a different direction. And so these 4 directions, basically these 4 what we call clusters or 4 quests, are basically this notion is more or less this aspect of like, help me get out, right? Job one is really this notion of how the way the way I'm managed is wearing me down, and I can't see a way to go or grow. Help me find a supportive environment so I can be challenged and learn and grow. And so ultimately, it's this notion of like wherever I am, I just want to get out, right? Two is actually a little bit different. Two is this thing is I'm overwhelmed at work, and the fact is that this is about regaining control, right? And the fact is that they're too far into work, and that there other things are sacrificing around it. Could be a sense of community, could be a sense of family, could be the fact that they want to do some hobbies, whatever it is. But it's like they're too far out of balance, and they want to be able to actually get to this point where they can actually understand how to have some they say regain freedom, or basically gain control so they can do other things, right? A third pattern is that I've reached probably, this is more about alignment. And this is about basically they've reached a personal milestone and responsibilities are growing, and they want to help me find an employer where I can take the next step in my career, right? And so ultimately this one is about knowing the thing is like at some point in time where I am now, I can't actually find a next step. I need to find a next step basically in my career. The last one, I'm sorry, this is the one that's really about the current employer doesn't value my experience or credentials. Help me find an employer who will appreciate my expertise so that I'm respected and acknowledged. And this is really about, realigning to basically what value you bring. And this is where sometimes you end up taking a job and inside a company where you get a promotion, but it's not really where you want to be. And you eventually have to kind of move back to where you want to go. And so ultimately it's finding these quests that you go on and understanding. And what I would tell you is in my lifetime, I've been in all four of these different kind of quests or jobs. And so part of it is understanding my context, understanding where I want to go, and then basically having a process to figure that out, right? And so when we start to do this is we started to prototype some different ways in which to do it. And we built a 9-step process to do this. Right. So part of it is being able to understand the quest you're on, right? But ultimately the pushes and pulls that determine why you need to change or what's causing you to say today's the day I got to do something different. And then there's a step of it, which is about understanding your energy drivers and drains. And this is where we actually go through and do some detailed, reflection on basically where are the moments when you have been at work, where all of a sudden time is distorted. And you actually walked into a meeting or walked into doing a set of tasks and you literally got energy from it. You actually had more energy for doing that work than you did when you walked in. And so it's trying to find these moments where you get energy, because ultimately that's a sign that this is a place where you should be. Conversely, we look at the same thing, which is what are the energy drains that you have? Things where you walk in and it's like, oh my God, this is just like watching paint drying. It's just miserable, right? So starting is really answering these questions about who are you, and then ultimately what do you want? And so we start to look at not only energy drivers and drains, but then your capabilities, right? What are you actually good at? What do you like to do? What don't you like to do? And what are some assets and liabilities you have, right? And then we start to frame around specifically the context you're in and the outcome that you're seeking, so we can start to then do what we call divergent prototyping. And ultimately in the divergent prototyping, this is where we're going to actually have you go find people who have a job that you looking for, so you can actually understand how well the rest of that job will fit. Because what you start to realize is job descriptions are made up and ultimately they just make a long list of things they want people to do, but you need to understand what that real job is about. And so we're going to talk about how you prototype things. And then ultimately, once you prototype, you start to realize there's a way to start scoring things and handling trade-offs, right? And ultimately, we want to be able to match your job to the weights of the things that are most important to you right now. And ultimately, start to look at a story spine to start to think about building the story of what your career path starts to look like, not only in this move, but in the next move. And then ultimately, start applying for jobs. We built this book primarily to answer what I would call are two very fundamental questions. Who are you? And ultimately, who are you not? Like, what do you suck at? Which that gets the energy drains, if you will. And then ultimately, what do you want? And so that's the homework we've been finding that people have been missing. And so they'd rather just kind of almost take an inventory of, here's the things I can do. Here's the things that people say they want. How do I actually line up to it? And how do I figure it out? And what we found is that the fact is the more you can be clear on what you want and more clear on what you're looking for, and you can actually be realistic about the trade-offs that you have to make, then ultimately you can actually kind of do this. So that's the basic premise of the book. I'm going to stop sharing and kind of open it up for questions. Hold on, I gotta go here. Sorry, I gotta go here. I'm gonna go back to this, right? And so ultimately, there's this is the book called Job Moves, and it's basically coming out September 19th. I wrote it with Michael and Ethan Bernstein, and what we've been doing is using it as a prototype to basically help people kind of before they actually kind of get to what job do they want. It's kind of like, let's take a reflective 2-week, 3-week process to literally reflect on what gives us energy, what are we about, where are we right now, what does the next step look like for us, and being able to kind of build the strategy of what you want to be able to do from getting a new job. Oh, you're muted. You're muted.
Thank you.
There you
I
go.
was precaution to mute. All right. So it seems like we're getting a little feedback. The feed was buffering a little. We will share a recording, so don't worry if you missed any of the insights. We can handle some very specific questions first, and then I want to get into some more theoretical questions. So someone's asking, will the book be on Audible?
Yes, it will. Of course, I'm dyslexic myself, and so want to record. And Ethan and Michael have both recorded it, so it's great. So yeah, it will be an Audible as well.
Oh, that's amazing. That's good for me because that's
how I really like books that are read by the authors, and so I wanted to make sure that was done. But I have, obviously, being dyslexic, it's that you would not want to hear me try to read this book.
Even the idea of doing that overwhelms me.
Yes, lots
excellent.
of anxiety.
And all right, so one of the things that was coming up for me as I was hearing you talk and as I skimmed through the book, is this idea of leaning into what I'm good at versus what I'm not good at. And I feel like a lot of us are sort of taught to fill in our deficiencies, right? Better at things we suck at. And like, what were some of your learnings in that process? And like, what were like the real blockers for people to get past?
So there's a couple of things. One is like, I have a very significant deficit in reading, right? I've had 3 close head brain injuries. It's like a fact. And to be honest, I tried to work on spelling because I was this notion of you're deficient in it, you got to work on it. So I literally took an hour a day to work on my spelling every day until I was 35 years old, where I decided to say, like, okay, screw it. Like, I can't spell. Let's just call a spade and be good about it, right? The other part, though, is then I started to tell people I was dyslexic. And they said, oh, that makes so much sense. Oh, how can I help? And so I'm like, oh my gosh, like, really? At some point, you just thought I was just illiterate. But the reality is, the moment I come up with an excuse, it's okay. The thing that I started to realize is what I'm really good at. So, for example, I'm very creative and I'm very good at basically connecting dots. But one thing I'm really not good at is organizing and basically keeping things organized. And the fact is if I try to actually get better at organization, I actually hurt my creativity, right? And so you start to realize that these skills are all interdependent or they're interconnected. And so when I try to make myself better at something that I'm good at or that I'm bad at, I end up destroying the things that I'm good at. And so to me, I try to actually help people realize, like, at some point in time, if you're good at these things, let's make sure we know what you're bad at so you can actually start to design those things out of your job description. Because at some point, like I was sitting next to somebody who had just fired somebody, and they realized coming in, they weren't good at these 3 skills, right? And then they basically had them work there for 3 years, and ultimately they never got good at those 3 skills, and they ended up firing them for those 3 skills. And one of the questions I asked is like, why didn't you just design that part out of the job description? And they're like, huh? What do you mean? Like, is that possible? I'm like, yes, that's possible. And like, so you're telling me that I'm literally getting rid of people because, of the way the job description, I'm like, well, how do you write them? And then they start to tell me, well, it's a list. We usually copy and paste it from somewhere. We now get it from ChatGPT. We throw it around. Everybody adds what else they want that person to do. And it turns out to be a unicorn of some sort that nobody actually ever fits in. And so this aspect of being able to talk about the job description and realize that, like, not everybody can do every skill is literally about how do we actually get the work to fit people as opposed to try to find people to fit the work. And so we're helping organizations do that right now. And so it's this really interesting, I think of this as a two-sided market problem, is that we're building resumes and just trying to send resumes out, which are just history of what we've done, not what we do and what we like to do. And job descriptions are just a wish list of things we want somebody to do. And ultimately it turns out to be a unicorn, and you put the two together and they don't work. And so I get a superhero and a unicorn, and I think I got it all to work. And 3 months later, I'm back to the drawing board because I didn't actually unpack what they're good at and what I'm really trying to get done. And so it's using these two sides to actually help figure this out. And so we're helping both employees. So the book is primarily written for employees to help them figure out how to find the quests. And then ultimately the back part is for employers to figure out how do you actually, one, find better people, and two, how do you keep people? Because if they have no pushes, there's nowhere there for them to go. And as long as they're making progress, they'll want to stay. That's really the insight we found, is that like if people really like their job, they don't have time to look.
Right. And that's, that's one of the things we try to work through is how do we, look, keeping your career moving and finding, and solving for all the things, and life is dynamic also. Like what
That's
I solve
right.
for
That's
now, to what you brought up, it could be different.
Well, and to your point before, is what I'm good at when I was 20, I still might be good at it, but I just don't like to do it anymore.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's a difference between what I'm good at and what gives me energy. And that's the dynamic part, because again, when I was 30, I had a very different set of, thinking and mentality around than I am when I'm 60.
Yeah. The one I use all the time is I'm actually a very good 3D modeler.
Yes.
But it's like not a skill I really need anymore.
Yes.
And like, I want to teach my daughter how to do it, but I don't think I'd apply to a job,
That's right.
that had that on the abilities.
That's right.
Thinking about, drainers and drivers.
Yes.
I'm sure this is covered in depth in the book, so I recommend everyone get it. 200 copies are being sent to folks that join.
Yep.
But what are some of the high level things that people can use to identify like what's a drainer and a driver?
Yeah. So the way that I talk about drains and drives, are those energy drivers and energy drains, are those moments, and I try to go back into very specific moments in the last week, in the last month, in the last year, where you were like in flow, right? The notion that your abilities and your challenges are balanced, that you're actually doing the stuff that you really like to do. That's what I would call an energy driver. And then there's two kinds of energy drains. There's what I call the bored side of it, where your abilities exceed the challenge, or there's the frustration side where your skills are lower than what the challenge is. And ultimately that's the thing that's going to cause you to kind of leave. And so part of this is to understand the boundaries of flow, and where do you hit flow, and when are you doing the work that you should be doing.
Yeah, that's when you can get to like that makes a lot of sense to me. Like I tell people, and I think that self-awareness is key. Like I tell people I'm a natural starter. I get energized from starting.
Yes.
I can finish things, but it is disproportionately more draining for me.
Yes.
I just feel at the end of that day, I'm so exhausted. And I try to observe other people as well. Like we'll do brainstorming sessions and I come out ready to go run a marathon. And I see other people that are so exhausted. I'm like,
exactly.
Oh, we didn't experience that the same. And that's totally okay. But it also kind of helps me calibrate what are things I come out of energized, and sort of in contrast, seeing what drains others.
But this is the other part, is to realize like part of this is that there's what you suck at. There's somebody's actually out there who was really, really good at it. And so part of this is we're not necessarily supposed to all hit on all cylinders all the time. But the reality is that to realize we need diversity of thinking and diversity of approaches. And ultimately the fact is like, I hate accounting. I found somebody who loves accounting. Oh my gosh, they get so much satisfaction from watching things balance. I'm like, oh my God, I wish I could get that much joy from it. But it's like, all I see is when it doesn't balance, and then all the problems. And so you start to realize like, let me go find somebody who knows how to make this work. And to be honest, I don't touch accounting except for basically overview and looking at and the responsibility of reviewing kind of monthly statements. But for the most part, I don't touch it because it's not in my wheelhouse. Right.
Yeah. And I think that's such an important career and sort of life unlock, because you can build teams better. You find better collaborators. You can find more joy in your work. It's quite empowering. It's counterintuitive in a way from everything we were taught to do. Well, we've got a couple of questions from people watching, which is awesome. I'm going to jump around a little bit. So what trends are you seeing from companies and the folks you talk to in terms of fractional or part-time? Like you're starting to see a sort of growing trend of like fractional
Yeah.
positions
So that's
or the 4-day work week.
yeah,
Thoughts
yeah.
on
So
that?
one of the things that I've seen that's very interesting is two things. Is that let's say when I grew up, people would have two jobs because usually they needed more money. But nobody really worked two jobs to get experience or to do something that they liked. And now you start to realize that there's actually more work than there are people. But at some point in time, it's distributed in a very different way. And so sometimes people have two or three, they have a main job and then they have two side gigs, right? And so you start to realize that employers are actually becoming more and more aware of like the notion of what a side gig is and being able to help on a side gig basis. The other part is to realize like at some point that people are willing to actually realize like at some point I need something to pay the bills and I might need something that has my passion in it, but they don't necessarily have to be the same thing. And so part of it is people are kind of separating kind of work into several different buckets. And so I feel like employers are getting on board with this, as well as employees are basically starting to realize like I can have multiple jobs and it's something where I have a passion around it, right? And the interesting part is in the old days we'd call those hobbies, but now people just make their hobbies a place where they can work, right? They turn it into an Etsy store, they turn it into something else they have a passion for.
It's an interesting thing also there, and I wonder if we'll get past this. I mean, little side story.
Yeah.
My wife's a ceramicist.
Yeah.
And one of her big struggles through life was everyone saying like, oh, you need to make that your income.
Yeah.
And we met in architecture school. And she finally said, no, I don't want that to be sort of colored by needing to make money. She's like, I make money in real estate and design and architecture, and I'm not going to sell my pieces. I'm going to give them away.
Yep.
But I don't want this. And I think that's a tricky thing. Like the world, oh, you're good at this, sell it. I'm sure Greg, who's your partner, has been told to sell his paintings. And I think for him, it's just like a release. He's like, I just like painting. I don't want to have to sell them.
I just like painting as well. So we both paint, and it's one of those things where it's like I've got over 800 paintings, but like I have no interest in selling them. Like if you want one, just take it off the wall. Like that's fine, right? It's like, but it's like I think making it my passion or trying to make money from it would ruin some of it. So one of the things I've learned actually about myself in writing this book is that it's the notion of systems, and that I need systems for the work that I suck at so I can gamify it. But the moment I wrap systems around the things I love to do, I ruin them. Right? And so you start to realize like, and I was taught like everything should be a system. Everything has to be a system. But it turns out like there's some things that when you make them a system, I don't actually like to do them they don't give me energy anymore. And so things that are over processized basically don't necessarily give me as much as much energy as kind of like the things that are organic, if you will. And so I'm learning those kinds of things and realizing like being very, like you said, being very self-aware of what things give me energy and don't, and then realizing what I need to wrap systems and processes around and what things I just need to make sure I just schedule time to do it.
So we got a few more questions here. This one's a little more of a meta question, which I thought was interesting. Is how did you go about differentiating this job/career advice book from others in the market? Curious what you think the value prop is for USP or USP, unique selling proposition. I'm interested because I do brand and strategy and marketing.
Yes. So the real USP around this was the fact is we were mainly trying to help people who basically were in a job and ultimately got to a point where they didn't want their boss's job. And so it was this aspect of they had idea where to go next. And ultimately they had run out of the runway. And what we started with was that underlying premise of like, how do you go find the next thing when it's not necessarily in your purview? And so ultimately it's about being able to really dig deep into yourself. And again, decide who you are and what you're not, who you are and who you're not. And then ultimately, what do you want? And ultimately those trade-offs you have to make. And so it's going through that process of I think of it as all the homework required to get to the place where you want to be. And it's all the self-reflective stuff you need to actually start to think about to figure that out. So it's more about not necessarily writing the resume. It's more about knowing who you are and how do you write the resume based on who you are and who you're not, and what you want to do and what you don't want to do. Right.
In the research, this is a question from me because
Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot of depends on where what circles you sort of hang in, but
Yeah.
a lot of the ways it's talked about to get autonomy and fulfillment from your work is to start your own business, hang your own shingle.
Yep.
And I know so many people that are miserable from starting their own business. They want to go deeper in their craft. I went to architecture school, and so many architects that thought their only path to autonomy and career fulfillment was starting a firm. But then they had to do billing, they had to do marketing, and they didn't get to do architecture anymore. In the research, what were like the pushes and pulls that would lead people to say, oh, let me find a new job as an FTE in that life versus let me go pursue the path of entrepreneurship?
Yeah. And so part of this is it's the way that they set, like, it's not just any one of them. It's the way the multiple forces kind of came together to build that up. But ultimately you got to things like, hold on a second, like as I go to these things, like it got down to the fact is I was either disrespected at work or I don't trust or respect the people that I'm working with. And so it's over time, it's like they're pushing you too hard. They're asking you to do things that you don't know how to do. They're not giving you the training you need, right? It could be the fact that you're bored, right? So all of these things, kind of what we started to do is just hear people's stories, and you know that you know the process that as we hear the stories, we identify kind of the pushes and pulls, and then we affinitize them into kind of a global set. And so ultimately we have, lots and lots of statements, but there's the aspect of that these pushes that we actually talk about, which is, again, the way I manage the trust, I've reached a milestone, things that happen to you basically are the things that prepare you to actually start to look. Does that answer the question?
So it's more like situational, as you're saying. It's kind of like the conditions
It's the
shape.
condition. That's the condition shape. So this is what's very interesting, at least to me, is like most people are trying to look for a job that's almost devoid of a context. And what they have to do is they actually have to take into account their context, because the context then dictates the trade-offs you're willing to make. I'm willing to actually travel a little bit more if I make a lot more money. Ultimately, if I otherwise I'm willing to commute if I actually get basically paid for commuting. Like, and you start to realize, like, at some point in time, I'd rather work remotely so I can actually work out. And so the fact is that remote is actually more important to me, because otherwise I'm going to be sacrificing my workout time. And so it's this aspect of making sure that you're looking at your entire life as you're trying to make these decisions about what life will be like at this new job. Right. And so it's thinking about the experiences that you're going to have and the experiences you need to have in order to, as opposed to the features or the package that you're looking for, which is, I need 3 weeks vacation. Like, okay, 3 weeks vacation is nice, but like, does everybody else in your family get 3 weeks? Is 3 weeks enough? Like, what you know what I mean? Like, all of a sudden it's thinking about the real implications of kind of what you're getting when you actually sit down to negotiate.
How in the research, how'd you get people to dig deeper? Because I feel like that's what happens a lot. It's like people optimize for these surface level conditions, comp, but then once they're in the job, like, oh, actually, my insurance went down, or I really like my manager was great, and they find themselves in these conditions of regret.
Yes.
And then they're somewhat like backpedaling. And what mechanisms or tools did you? I'm
So
sure they're in the book, but
when
like, help people.
the first thing we did is we did, if you will, is the exit interviews that everybody should be doing, but nobody does, which is like, these people had like, all we did was talk about the last job switch they did and tell us what happened and why they did it, and that nobody did it randomly. And these interviews were anywhere from 30 minutes to 90 minutes. And they would tell you the stories of like what was really going on. And because we had enough, as we got more and more interviews, we could actually understand kind of like where were those points where they would pause and they'd say, well, I wanted more money. And we actually would say, well, what does that mean? What did you need more money for? And they'll start to say, well, to be honest, I don't really need more money. I just want the respect. I'm like, oh, okay. So all of a sudden you started to unpack it. So part of this was going from what we call the pablum layer past the fantasy nightmare layer down to the causal layer. And so it's learning criminal intelligence interrogation methods to actually get to kind of what are the real things going on in people's lives that made them switch. Because most people will say, oh, I got more money. And what's interesting is 53% of the people who said got more money didn't get more money. Right? It was the way in which to shut up the previous employer about why they were leaving, because they didn't want to really tell them the truth. So that's really what we were actually digging for, is what was really going on. And ultimately what we'd ask for is we'd fact check by saying, they say, well, my boss was, really disrespectful. Give me an example. And then they would talk about, okay, check, got that. Like, but if they couldn't come up with a decent example, it's typically then the fact is they might have been that way, but they couldn't think of it. And so part of this was trying to go as deep as we could to get all that information out.
It's interesting. One of the things that I've seen happen a lot is an idea of like fairness, like finding out that one of your peers in a very similar position makes more than you.
Yes.
And let's assume all things are equal. There's also the aspects of gender and race, and those those are not great. But even let's just, for the purposes of this, say they're equal. It's just like, that's just not fair. And it's almost like irrecoverable on the company's part.
Yes.
At that point, because I think you're right. It's like, I don't feel valued. I don't feel respected.
It's more the fact you have to ask for, basically, to say, like, I have to fact check you to say that I should be making more or as much as that person over there. And it's like, that's how you lose trust. Like, that's how we got to this point of like, I don't trust them, because at some point they're not paying me for what fairly compared to everybody else. Right. And so this is where we would unpack what that meant to them and why they did what they did.
Yep, that makes sense.
That gets that language about trust. That's where trust really comes from. The fact of, like, at some point, I can't trust you because you're not paying me enough, or you're not being fair to me. What appears to be fair. That's usually what happens when you break trust.
Right, you're not being forthright.
That's right.
So I can't believe anything you say now.
That's correct. That's correct.
So another theme that's coming up in the questions, we can jump to step 8, which is the story spine.
Yeah.
Is people crafting their narrative. I think people really struggle with crafting their narrative, essentially making their pitch.
Yes.
And I've always seen, like, people are really good at like pitching a restaurant, saying, oh, that place is great, or buy this product. But when it comes to themselves, they're humble. And we've sort of been taught to be humble, and, boasting is not good. How do you recommend people get better at telling their story?
Yes. That's why I think learning to say what you suck at is really important. Because in it is built actually some humility to realize, like, this might, like, you're going to have me do this part. I'm really good at these things, but like when we get to job, like basically when I have to do the formal reviews, I'm really slow about that. And so, to be honest, I'm not really good at it. And the fact is if you wanted me to do that, like, it's better if somebody else was to do that. But if you're going to have me do that, realize it's probably going to take me twice as long as somebody else. Like, this is where, because you have a superpower, that's what we're really trying to find, is what are your superpowers, and how do we actually weigh them against kind of the liabilities that you have, so people can actually see the real value you can bring to the table. And what happens is we end up getting into a job that we actually end up having 90% of the work we do we hate for the 10% of the work we love. And what you want to do is fight. This is where what we're trying to do is teach you how to fight for the work you want to do, because ultimately when you do that, you're not working anymore, right? And so part of this is to actually be very clear about what you want. And to be honest, I've had people, like, this is where it's been crazy, where you ask people about what they want, and the company will turn around and say, like, wow, you know what you want, write the job description for me. And then they let you write the job description, right? And again, in startups, you're able to do that. I would say in big corporations, you're not. But ultimately, it's about you making choices about where you want to go and why you want to go somewhere else. And what progress are you really trying to hope to do besides just make more money? Because most of it's really, like, I think money is part of it, but it's not the entire aspect of it anymore.
I think that clarity is something, as an employer, that's incredibly attractive.
Yeah.
When
somebody shows up with that much clarity.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's empowering. And those are the people you want to work with. It's like, hey, what projects do you want to take on? Like, I don't know. It's like, I hire people to take things off my plate. Right.
Yeah.
So and then empower me to do more. And so if it's like, oh, now I need to think for you what you want to do, and I got to shape your career. Of course, like, as a mentor and a leader, you want to help people, but in terms of like candidate A, candidate B, the one who's kind of got clarity on what they want to do, there's something about that that's more appealing than the person's like, look, I'm willing to do anything. It's like, I appreciate the attitude, but I
Right,
more appreciate the
that
clarity.
doesn't help. That doesn't help me that much, right? That's exactly right. And so part of this is being able to get that clarity and to know what it is, but also the clarity of knowing what I shouldn't be giving you. Like that's actually really powerful for people to go like, yeah, I shouldn't be giving that to Bob. Like that's actually really helpful for me and helpful for them because they're not asking me to do stuff that I can't do. Right. Or I just don't want to do. And there's some things I will do to like for a period of time, but like I won't do certain things anymore because it's just like I want as much energy driving moments as I can. I'm being selfish.
I think it's a critical thing. So that I'm going to jump backwards to step 3,
Yeah.
which is the sort of documenting or indexing of all your capabilities.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's outlined in detail in the book, but I think a lot of people take for granted what they're capable of.
Yes.
And because they're good at it, and so they don't even realize it. But what are some high level tips on doing that like archival work on all your capabilities?
Yeah. So this is where what we suggest is we actually have somebody kind of like you team up with people and you interview each other about kind of like your capabilities and what you've done. So it's like almost going through your resume and asking like, how did you do that? What's the verb that tells me what you did? You know, and so it's like because most resumes just talk about the past. They don't talk about your current capabilities. And we think that what you're good at and what functions you can do, what like I can analyze, I can do this, but like what are those things you really are good at? You want to be able to articulate and you want to articulate them very, very clearly because people will find things for you to analyze, especially if you're articulate about what you like to analyze, right? So I
Yeah,
think
something
that
I found.
I think that's part of it. I think the other thing is that we have to realize that at some point in time, your capabilities have liabilities. Like your ability to know how to use CAD has some liabilities with it. If you don't use it for a period of time, it goes away. And so there's sometimes you come back to it, but like there's some things you have to keep current on in order to basically keep it as a capability. And so it's looking at capabilities kind of like almost like a business or a product to say like we have these capabilities and we want to make sure we keep them. So like if I'm a programmer, I want to learn new languages. And so all of a sudden, like how do I actually make sure that I'm building new languages in my capabilities? And so it's taking inventory of that from that perspective around you and saying what capabilities do you have? What capabilities do you want to acquire? What capabilities do you need to maintain?
And another thing is thinking about as you're doing this sort of documenting process is I talk about capabilities as tasks and nouns or products, right? And so I know Tableau, which implies I know data analysis,
Yeah,
but that's actually not one and the same. There's all sorts of forms of data analysis. So
that's right.
so be mindful of proxies.
Yes.
And my general advice is be exhaustive, cover everything. You don't have to put it all on your resume, but for yourself,
Be
document
be be
everything,
prepared to
everything you
talk
know.
about it. That's the thing is be prepared to talk about it. And again, if you've uncovered these energy driving moments, right, where they happen, this is where you want to tell stories about where you actually went and did something and like not only did you will the excitement show, but you're going to show your capabilities at the same time of what you're trying to do. And so part of this notion of going back and looking at your energy drivers and drains is inventorying stories to talk about your capabilities, right? And so ultimately this is where like the interesting part is walking people through the 9 steps. By the time they get to interviewing for the job, they're so good at having conversations with people because we force them to go talk to people and talk about themselves to almost like strangers and other people so they can actually get comfortable with that, having that dialogue, because a lot of people haven't actually been interviewing and so they're really stale and so it comes across the wrong way.
Yeah, interviewing is a tricky one. The more we can make it natural, I just feel like
Yep.
obviously there's a weird power dynamic, right? You're being evaluated, you're being judged. But I think it's when people let that get in their head and they're
Yeah.
not just like thinking about it. I'm just excitedly talking about the successes I had at my previous employment.
Yes.
It can become much more natural and you can gravitate towards the things you're really excited about. And you have, I think, far more agency in those discussions than people realize.
Yeah, so I'm helping somebody who's in the consulting realm right now. They want to move into the customer success realm, and so they've literally went through and talked about kind of their energy drivers and drains. We basically did some divergent prototyping of being an analyst, being, customer success, being basically an onboarding expert, being, staying in consulting. And as like they laid this out, one of the things that she had to go do was go talk to people who had these jobs that she doesn't know anything about. And so her just learning how to talk to these people who have these jobs taught her how to actually ask questions in her red. So by the time she got to actually interviewing for the job, it was just a natural conversation because she didn't have to talk about herself because she had talked to people enough about what's that job like and what is it about and how do you, so all of a sudden it became almost like very like appearing to be very confident, but the reality is what it was is she was very comfortable about having the conversation.
I think you said a key word is confidence. I think we have like a sixth sense, I think, like as a species, for when there's a lack of confidence.
Yes.
And a person who is confident in what they're doing, sometimes to our detriment, unfortunately, because I think we're quite susceptible to it.
Yeah.
But that confidence goes a very long way in being able to talk about your capabilities.
That's right. That's right. And again, it's not only the confidence in what you're good at, but also the right way to bring up what you're not so good at makes you seem human, because these are human decisions we're making. These aren't AI decisions, if you will. And so part of this is to realize like we're going to need to make sure that you're well-rounded in the right ways, and at the same time help me understand what you can't do, because at some point 9 times out of 10 people look at somebody and say like they're too good to be true. It's usually that's the case.
So we've been going for a bit here. How can people get the book? When's the book coming out?
Yeah.
What are the various ways it's coming out?
So to be honest, we're getting emails. We're going to send basically. I think you have a list of all the emails, correct, of people who are here.
We've got all our RSVPs.
Yeah. So we need addresses, and once we have those, we'll be sending you an email back to confirm an address, or we'll send you a link to basically where the book should go. And then once we get that filled out, the book comes out on the 19th. The goal is to ship all the books out November 19th, and for you to get them in that first week.
And it'll be on Audible as well.
It'll be on Audible as well, but the book is what I'll be sending you. I don't have access to being able to send people the Audible version of it, but it will be on Audible
on the 19th. I'll buy that version on the 19th.
Yeah, on the 19th. And I have 2 co-authors. One is Ethan Bernstein, he's a professor at the Harvard Business School, and he works in organizational behavior. And so he's one of the co-authors, and the other one is Michael Horn, he was at the Guild Corporation, but also teaches at the Harvard School of Education. And we wrote a book together called Choosing College, which is the jobs of why people choose higher education.
Excellent. And for short term, there's a website they can go to.
Yep. So if you go to jobmoves.com, you'll see there's a couple things. One is there's the introduction to the book is there, so you can read that and get that going. The other thing is there's an assessment that would basically talk about kind of like you talking about your current situation, so it can then tell you the most likely job that you're or most likely quest that you're in, to basically then help you frame kind of what options you have in terms of moving forward.
Great. Well, to get everyone the book, everyone that RSVP'd on LinkedIn, I'm going to try to send you DMs through that. That's the easiest. Yep. If you don't hear from me, just send me a DM or send me a connection request. Another way is to join the Teal community, which is at community.tealhq.com. The logistics of getting this stuff's a little tricky, but if you don't hear from us, let me know, and I'll make sure your info makes its way to Bob.
Yep, and we're doing the first 200 people who've kind of signed up and asked. So make sure that you're looking for it as we kind of get that out.
All right. Well, this was awesome, Bob. Thank you. I really look forward to this discussion. So many great tips and insights, and it's very cool to see how extensible Jobs to be Done is.
Yes.
Even in sort of pursuing a career. It's such a powerful framework.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks.
See ya.
See y'all later.